The Ukrainian leader doesn't believe there's going to be a full-scale invasion. What do you think?
I think he should be thinking about the full spectrum because in this case it is Mr. Putin who has the vote.
Simple as that. He's the one with the power. He can do what he wants. He can overrun Ukraine in how much time?
In however much time the Ukrainian army spends resisting. And certainly it's very intent on resisting. So I think the narrative that Ukraine is just a totally hapless victim waiting to be rolled over is also inaccurate. You know, Russia has lined up incredible destructive capacity from ballistic non-nuclear missiles to landing ships and tanks to airplanes. But the Ukrainians have an army of 250,000. They're calling up reserves, and Ukrainians are out there buying ammo to protect their homes and towns.
But how capable is the Ukrainian army of resisting?
You know, it's easier to resist than to attack. And so I think they've been preparing for these scenarios. They are psyching themselves up. I'm not going to, hazard a guess as to their plans and strategy.
Why is it easier to resist than to attack? I would have thought the opposite.
No, generally speaking, especially in land terms, you generally need a 3-to-1 advantage to be able to effectively go through a well-entrenched defender, and defenders know their own territory. They know the lay of the land. They've been able to maybe set some traps, diversions, that sort of thing. So, this is not coming as a huge surprise to the Ukrainians. They've tried to, the public messaging has been so far to tone it down, but I think we're seeing that change in the past day or two.
Why?
Just because ever since Putin's speech saying he basically doesn't believe Ukraine should exist, things have become literally existential.
What does it mean that the Russians have closed their embassy and consulates now? What kind of a signal is that?
It means they're freeing their hands for the full range of possible hostile activities.
Do you understand Vladimir Putin's motivation at all?
He's a man with a perceived historical mission. And that mission is not even to restore the Soviet Union, it's to restore the Russian Empire. That's what he's about. It's one of these things where sometimes analysts are too clever by half. Mm-hmm. The guy writes an article a year ago saying Ukraine and Russia are one people, and I think that the empire was great. And everybody says, he's trying to get some leverage on some economic issues. No, he actually, it turns out, he meant what he wrote. So applying Occam's razor tells us this is where we've ended up.
Well, how preposterous is Putin's idea that Ukraine has always been Russian culturally, blood ties, historically?
Well, depends on the region as well. I mean, we're sitting here in Lviv, and this is a city that has almost never been part of Russia. In fact, it was for 1 year in 1914, and then when the Soviets took over in 1944. Till 91. But other regions, no. The thing is that also for much of the early modern period, Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania were in the same state. So while Russia was part of the Golden Horde. So, there are different social patterns. Ukrainians are much more prone to working horizontally, and they look at Putin, they go, why should you be the boss of us?
But Putin's not laying regional claim to the eastern part of this country. He's laying claim to the whole country.
That's right, because he's got this vision that whatever was the maximum extent of a Russian empire in the past is what should belong to him. People have been posting memes about the Italians restoring the Roman Empire, or the Mongols restoring, Genghis Khan's empire. That's no way to really run a polity in the 21st century, but you've got a guy who's kind of stuck in around 1913.
Do you believe that?
I believe it. When I was ambassador in Serbia, I noticed that they began sending these people who talked to the very most conservative Serbs, deep into orthodoxy, deep into mysticism, and I thought, this is kind of weird. These guys are coming from the Russian Institute of Strategic Studies, connected to the presidential office. It's about 2011, 2012, and I thought, there's something fishy about this. And they're kind of saying, you guys used to have a big state dominating the Balkans. Well, we used to dominate. We've both been mistreated by NATO, mistreated by the West. Time to prepare ourselves to take vengeance. And again, it seemed a bit over the top, but now we're seeing, 10 years later, that sadly, it's kind of for real.
Is this Putin taking vengeance?
It is. I think he feels that him as a former KGB agent in Dresden in East Germany, who had to see East Germans rise up and tear down the wall and everything else that came after that, was a humiliation of him and the institution he worked for. And I think when somebody like President Obama referred to Russia as a sort of second-rate regional power, or McCain talked about it as a gas station with missiles, he found that deeply humiliating. And now it's payback time.
Is he delusional, as some are now saying?
He is highly invested in his own vision, let's put it that way, and willing to take risks and go to extents that no other current world leader is contemplating.
Is this the biggest risk he's ever taken?
Yes.
By far?
By far.
What's at stake for him then?
Well, if he were to suddenly fold, like Khrushchev did in 62, 63 after Cuban Missile Crisis, Berlin Wall, he was removed by his fellow Politburo members for being an adventurous risk taker and a bit of a crazy. I think the spectacle we saw, I think it was Monday night, of the Russian Security Council getting up one by one, saying, yes, boss, yes, boss, yes, boss. And if they deviated, he would tell them, hey, got that wrong, was him ensuring that none of the inner circle can say they weren't part of this decision. So it's kind of it's almost a bit like some sort of mafia movie scene.
Interesting comparison. Do you have any sympathy at all for Putin's position on NATO?
I think there is, you could say that there's a kind of a great power logic to say that, our country was weakened, we strategically fell back, you guys, or your side, gained, and now that we feel stronger, let's try and renegotiate the relationship. But the stuff about Ukraine, though, is not rational, and therefore it is very much harder to negotiate. I think people like President Macron and Chancellor Scholz spent much of last weekend trying to reason with Putin, and these are guys who are consummate negotiators. They are, they negotiate long, complex, boring EU documents. And they were trying to talk to him, and they discovered all they were getting was historical rants from him. I think Macron was saying out of his 6-hour meeting, 4.5 hours were devoted to Putin lecturing him on history. And I think Scholz also got an 1.5-hour lecture on history. So he is now in kind of legacy history mode, as opposed to pragmatically, what are we going to make out of the 2020s mode?
What tactic, short of invasion, could he now put in place for Ukraine? Slowly grinding, creeping annexation?
I think also economic pressure, and that's the area I now deal with most of all. Somebody's compared it to kind of a boa constrictor approach. Ironically, he gets to use some of our own mechanisms against Ukraine. For example, if you amp up the threat level, then Western insurance companies are going to say, we don't want to insure flights into Ukraine. We don't want to insure shipping into Ukraine. And then Ukraine's operating costs or opportunities are narrowed before the first tank crosses the border. Although I would add that the first tanks probably already have crossed into the supposedly independent republics, where they joined the Russian tanks that were already there surreptitiously under their previous bogus regime.
So look into your experienced crystal ball and tell us what's going to happen.
Oh dear. I would predict, unfortunately, that what you will see is the purported republics wanting to claim their full territory. In other words, the territory of the full former regions of Ukraine where they're located. They may well send some armor across the line to make that claim. They will then be stopped by the Ukrainian armed forces, and then the Russians will implement the Treaty of Friendship and Mutual Support that they've just signed and ratified and said, right, we are entering on the side of our esteemed pseudo-independent statelets. And after that, it's really up to Putin. The unfortunate thing is that he has a greater advantage in the high-end, high-tech side of armaments than he does in just tanks and soldiers and weapons. The Ukrainians are quite well equipped, and they have, as I said, the defender advantage. So the Ukrainians are going to need to be prepared to stay resilient through what may be a pounding.
Let's leave it there. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye.